Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friends Sam Clement and Courtney Trust. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey,
Doing
John.
fantastically. Hey, Courtney, how are you doing?
Good.
Good. Now, guys, here we are, 5-6 weeks into this whole mess in the Ukraine, right? And yet, I think for the average American is still kind of wondering, what's this all about? What's really going on for all the talk about this being the first, as someone this week said, this is the first real world war because of all the technology and we can see real-time type stuff. I'm still not exactly sure if I know exactly what's going on. And then, some of the conversations I'm having, and Courtney, I think you are too, it's like, what are these sanctions supposed to do, and what's America's endgame here? Well, I guess, what is America, the United States' definition for success in this whole situation, if we even have a definition for success?
And same with Russia, too, though. I mean, plenty of people are, I think rightfully so, asking what is their end game with it. And I get they have demands, but, there's still questions of, is that their end game? So there's just a lot of question marks, and our role specifically, being the world superpower, is definitely one of them.
Yeah. So, Courtney, you had some questions about, what are the roles some of these sanctions are going to do, and I think I think you said some of the sanctions seem to be half-baked. I think that
Yes.
think that was what you said.
Might have used a little stronger words, but yeah. Looking at what recently came out from the White House and, President Biden saying that they were going to have sanctions against Vladimir Putin's daughters, or the children which he acknowledges, and then some of the Russian banks. And I'm just curious on if, why does that even matter? And is that supposed to be, that's escalating it? Well, I don't think that that's going to matter to someone who is as self-consumed as Vladimir Putin is.
Well, I think in the global scheme of things, and I guess this is a global scheme of things,
Yes.
Sanctioning Putin's daughters has absolutely nothing to do about anything other than appearance's sake. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so for that. I think some of the other oligarchs getting, pushback and getting sanctioned and getting their boats taken from them, those were the people who put Putin into power. I mean, that's kind of generalizing it, but I think that is a little different when you start to get the people who really put Putin in power. If you can get those people, the goal is to get them against the war going on and hopefully change the tide over there.
Yeah, but Sam, you mentioned something a little bit earlier about what is Russia's end game is. I think going into Ukraine, what was that, the end of February, I think they had a pretty good idea what their end game was. The recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk and Ukraine always being neutral and all that stuff. I think that was really, if you had asked Putin what it was, hey, that's what I want. And all of a sudden they found themselves in a hand-to-hand, virtually, battle with a bunch of Ukrainians that are firing off with Stinger missiles and what have you out of their apartment buildings. I mean, you've shown me some of the video clips, and it turned out to be a heck of a lot more of a fight than what I would imagine the Kremlin or the headquarters thought it was going to be.
And this is something we talked about even really before it got going, talking about different countries and their general willingness to fight for themselves and defend their country. And Ukraine was very high on the list.
Yes, it was.
Especially compared to Western countries like the United States. And so I think that's something that, one, is hard to plan around, especially with the caveat that you're getting poor information, which it seems like
horrible information.
Well, it seems like nobody wants to probably tell the head honcho that, maybe our technology isn't as advanced as we'd like it to be.
Yeah, so that then takes us to sort of the question that Courtney had is, what is our role here? What is America's definition of success? What is our end game here if we're throwing out these, again, to use Courtney's terminology, half-baked sanctions, doing silly stuff like sanctioning Putin's daughters, and there's some other ones that I think, I can't remember any specifically off the top of my head. I'm going, okay, that's what we're doing?
Yeah.
That's how we're addressing this? Okay, if you say so. However, you mentioned it also, Sam, but it's the United States being the world's remaining superpower. What is the world's remaining superpower moral obligation, if you want to call it that, to go out and stop unnecessary bloodshed when we see it happen?
Well, I think that's a tricky subject, one, because it's got us into trouble several times in our past, and probably a lot more than people think of. I think there's a lot of examples of us going into conflicts that maybe we shouldn't have gone into, but I think the caveats are when there starts to be war crimes committed.
Yeah.
And that's where the conversation, I think, changes. I think maybe a war, battle, whatever we want to call it, going on between two countries that we have no association to may be one thing, but when they start killing innocent women, children, and
People.
yeah, I mean, just
regardless.
anybody.
Yeah.
Well, there's never been a war in history in which some innocent people didn't die. So there's always, in war, there will be war crimes, period. I mean, there's never been a perfectly, hey, maybe the war Philip's ear or something like that, or Jenkins' ear, I think it was. Maybe that was it. But there's just not going to be that many wars where you don't have war crimes. And so when in talking about, what's our end game here in the United States, why aren't we doing more? And I've read plenty of people saying we need to be doing more than just sending arms to Ukraine. It does seem mighty selective on how we have intervened in other sort of similar type situations or civil wars in the past. You're absolutely right. We've gotten involved in some situations that just ended up being a morass for the United States. Afghanistan clearly one. Vietnam, another one. I'd say Korea is a little bit
smaller
different.
conflicts outside of the
Iraq,
major
yeah.
wars that we think
Yeah.
of, going into countries in Central Africa and Eastern Africa, and just
Yeah, it's but and Iraq is another good one. But I mean, currently, you take a look at some of the stuff that's going on. It just gets no press, very little attention by the U.S. press. I mean, we have conflicts going on around the world. The war between the Tigrays or whatever they are in Ethiopia, that's producing a lot of body bags and claims of war crimes. There's the situation between the Houthis and all that stuff down in Yemen, which is really a proxy war between the Saudis and the Iranians.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of armed conflicts right now that are, deadly, and that people are dying, and that people are suffering, and that there's war crimes being happening. However, obviously, we're a little bit more of a Eurocentric sort of country in terms of our diplomacy, where we're focusing so much more on Russia relative to Ukraine. Should we be as selective as we are, or should we have a one-size-fits-all sort of type of process in place? Everyone loves processes.
I get that for sure, but I think the difficulty again and the reality of the situation is that Russia is a much more impactful country to the global economy than some of these other conflicts going on. And when we start talking about Yemen and oil, that's a whole different story. But Russia's not a massive part of the global economy, but it's still a chunk of the global economy.
It's intertwined with the European economy, which
Right.
is obviously
especially energy dependence and what have you. And so the reality of it is we're going to always care more about that kind of conflict than we are a conflict that has zero impact on us. War crimes or not, those are the conflicts we're going to care about.
So again, sort of money.
Money might drive things.
Yeah, money might drive things.
I think that's a rule that kind of never goes away.
Well, and I think to y'all's point, I mean, obviously, for me, I do kind of pull on the emotional side of when you see stories that 150 people were buried in a mass grave, potentially 300 people just murdered. At what point do you say, okay, giving sanctions for Vladimir Putin's daughters or for some banks that we don't really deal with that much, or for other political allies of Putin, that, okay, we're going to sanction these people? Well, that's not enough. And we need to be doing more. And, we do say, I relate it back to World War II, and you think, okay, well, maybe the general population wasn't as aware of, the genocide going on during World War II. Like, maybe we would have entered the war before Pearl Harbor and all of that. But I think for this, I'm like, we know too much. I mean, we already know with the constant cycle.
But that hasn't seemed to deter us with other countries that we have, large trade imbalances with and massive human rights violations going on. I mean, we still have our largest companies producing a large majority of their goods in China.
Yeah.
And if we're going to talk about human rights violations, it's hard to talk about human rights violations without talking about China in the same sentence. So,
But is the scale, you feel like the scale is the same? Okay.
It's much bigger.
And you feel like that is widely known and can be, I guess, proven?
I would say so to an extent.
And with that,
See, I feel like I don't hear as much. I mean, yes, I know some of the references that you're making, but I'm just like, when you look at the blatant disregard for human life and the Endgame and the demands that Russia's making still don't really measure up to creating this much conflict, in my opinion, right? From my perspective. I don't think that we have to have necessarily boots on the ground, but we should be elevating our military force.
I mean, my tinfoil hat opinion is that their end game is not with these demands that they have put in place.
So why even say it? Like, I mean, I guess my thing is like, what is...
Because they know they
behind the
won't agree
curtain?
upon, the Ukrainians won't agree to it, and then they're going to continue their onslaught. And then they'll move on to the next country that is looking at joining NATO.
Yeah, and I think Sam's probably right on that. I mean, on a lot of things, but Courtney, I mean, I hear what you're saying. The problem is, I mean, the general public saying, what should we be doing? We need to be doing more, but what is it that we can really do to truly stop a guy like Vladimir Putin or President Xi Jinping over in China, but for boots on the ground, but for being involved in a hot war with them? I mean, Vladimir Putin. We've sanctioned him. The more we sanction, the more they're going to push back. That's just the way these type of people are. And recently, I mean, I think it is kind of spineless. I mean, we talk a lot about human rights and all that stuff, and yet Chinese, I mean, by all accounts, I mean, at least by Western standards, are huge violators of them, and there's not a free speech and there's not democracy over there. But yet, when it comes to economics, my goodness, we have some of our more major countries that are going over there and hat in hand to Beijing and kind of falling in lockstep. And so there is a little bit of
Money speaks.
But at the same time, like that... And I know this doesn't justify war crimes or human rights violations occurring, but they are happening within China, right? And that's, if it would be an act of war to go to China and be like, you can't treat your people, this way. Russia has invaded another country and is committing war crimes on other citizens that are not Russian. And so I feel like that's the clear difference. Like, our Ukrainians are asking for help. They don't want Russia doing that. And I'm not saying that Chinese people aren't asking for help, but that's their own country. And that's where it gets a little bit, to me, there's not necessarily like a war conflict going on. And so to your point, John, like, what can we do? Well, we have been able to leverage technology with drones and stuff like that. And yes, accidents occur where innocent people die in war, but you've said in any conflict that can happen. Why don't we go in there with a strong military force and blast Putin out?
Well, I think part of the problem is Russia still has half of the world's nuclear arms, and it's unfortunate for the Ukraine. They were, I think, third in nuclear arms, and the whole deal for them was they'd get protected,
right, by
the Budapest Proclamation and all that stuff. But all of those arms were put there by Russia. And when the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Russia wanted its toys back for all intents and purposes. So, in terms of going back to the original sort of questions, does the United States have an end game here? Or do we just sit back and allow this to happen and do, again, Courtney's half-baked sanctions? And what is it we could effectively do, Sam, in a situation like this where no one really wants to get into a hot war with the Russians, but at the same time, no one wants this current situation to persist?
Oh, we would have to be willing to accept economic pain here, I think. And I think that's part of the issue is the sanctions. When we talk about half-baked sanctions, the ones that would really cause any sort of impact would completely shut off Russia from the global economy. It would spike gasoline prices even more. Wheat would be another issue. I mean, there's a whole host of issues that we would have to be willing to accept. And I don't think we're there yet, especially when you look at how people are already complaining about, rightfully so, $4 a gallon gasoline. Things can get a lot worse. And I don't think people are willing to do that, just like companies aren't willing to pay more for goods not created in human rights zones.
And so let's take that. Let's throw it back on the mom with a basketball team full of kids driving around and complaining about higher gasoline prices. Would it be worth it to you to completely cut off Russia from the global economy? Completely cut it off. I mean, all barriers, and have that potential global economic slowdown and a shortage of fossil fuels taking gasoline to, let's say, $5-6 a barrel or a gallon, Would that be worth it to you to stop the turmoil in Ukraine?
I think it would if we had a clear executed plan where there was transparency to the American people. Like, I know that obviously the president and Congress know a lot more than we do, and I know there's a reason. Hopefully, right?
That's a big leap of.
Well, you would think that there is
leap of
some
faith here.
additional information that somebody
Surely this
has.
guy knows more than me.
Right? I mean,
One would hope.
yes, one would
But
hope.
that is a massive assumption.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would hope, and I guess like I would want to see transparency. I don't want. Okay. Well, we're gonna sanction them this much, and it's only gonna be the U.S. that are gonna that cut them off. But we don't know how long it's gonna be, and that's the only thing we're gonna do. No, like if you're gonna go in there, you're gonna say, okay, we're gonna start this week or 2 weeks. This is what we're gonna. Okay, if that doesn't work, we're gonna escalate it to this. If that doesn't work, we're gonna escalate and have a very clear like plan of action.
Would you
Over a
want
short
this to
period of time.
escalate to a hot war?
I don't want to be in war, but what I do want to send a clear message to Russia is to say you can't just go around invading countries, committing war crimes, and think that no one's going to hold you to it. Like, I mean, the fact that he's seen how long he can get away with this, and
You have to be willing to accept a hot war, though, at that point, I think. I think that's crossing a line to where if we are going to say we will bear the pain of a complete collapse of the Russian economy, they are not going to sit there and take that.
So what, they're going to start, so then they would escalate a war. And does Russia, if they're completely cut off...
They view us shutting their economy down as an act of war.
Right. So, okay, so then if we have our allies in line with us and they do the same thing, which I don't know that they would even be willing to do that, just based off their, I guess...
History?
Yes.
Their willingness to not fund their military.
Right. I guess I just go back to how much do we just sit back and watch this happen? And, we've seen more articles probably on Will Smith slapping Chris Rock than we have, what are we going to do about Ukraine? And to me, I'm like, we can't just stick our heads in the sand when things like this happen. And I mean, I see your point. Like, okay, well, what's the end game? But I think that this is dragging on.
It's something we continually do, though, is stick our heads in the sand. That is not new to this. It's happened.
And I think everyone's kind of dancing around the same thing is we don't know what the definition of success is. State Department hasn't given it to us. I'm not exactly sure I ever knew what the definition of success was in Afghanistan. I'm not exactly sure if I ever knew what the true definition of success was after we kicked Saddam Hussein out, what the definition of success was in Iraq, because there's never been a good definition. And Courtney, I agree with you. I mean, if all of a sudden the administration, State Department comes out as these are the sanctions we're going to do. This is what we believe the impact will be. And if that doesn't work, we're going to move on to this.
Yes.
And that's probably because we're just analytical people, but that's maybe not the way political types think.
And I think that's hard to do, too, politically.
Well, and I think Iraq and other Middle Eastern conflicts were more about changing the mindset of the people within the country, right? It was to make them a democracy.
Well, that
to
was
make
just
them
wishful thinking.
Right. And so, but I'm like, our clear goal.
Lots of oil there, too.
Yeah. But our goal here should be to provide Ukraine their freedom in the sense that...
Why should that be our goal?
Okay, is to get Russia out of Ukraine, right?
Well, I mean, devil's advocate, why is that our job?
Because why would we let a country invade another country and create war crimes and all of that? Because then they're just showing their might. So, okay, let them invade Ukraine, and then they're going to invade the next country, and then they're going to invade the next country. At what point do you say, hey, no, you need to stay in your...
I mean, I'm viewing this as a 26-year-old who could possibly be drafted if it ever came to that. And
at what point would you... I mean, because it could be the end game. You're going to let them take over Ukraine, and it's going to be a bigger and bigger potential conflict. So wouldn't you rather the military force that we already have, people who have already said that they want to enlist, rather than having to have a draft, go in and shut it down now?
Yeah,
I'd rather just not go at all.
Well, I know, but what if that's not an option?
Yeah, and I've got a son that could be drafted. So, I mean, that's where we might trade perspectives because, I mean, your kids are still pretty young.
Right.
And, being a mother of 1,000 like you are, just you're not going to be involved in it. And so that kind of takes it to maybe where we are trading perspectives a little bit based on where we are in our grand scheme of life. I mean, Sam could feel the real pinch, getting in there. I could feel the pinch through my son, and that's ultimately. That's kind of maybe the litmus test a little bit, if we're truly honest. Is when does it get to a situation where we feel it is in our nation's moral imperative to risk our sons and daughters to go fight? And everyone's going to be a little bit different. Everyone's going to have their own definition. Some people will say that never happens. Other people will say we need to go do it right now. But I would say right now, based on how we have been taught about this, the things that we think are being done or whatnot, we are nowhere near as a nation ready to say this is what we want to go do. And I believe our State Department, regardless of who is in office, needs to come up with sort of a definition for what success looks like in these situations. What does success look like for the United States and Ethiopia in that conflict? What does success look like in Yemen? What are some of the definitions we can make? Okay, this is a real problem. This is a secondary problem. This is a tertiary problem. And right now, if we have that, the American public doesn't know about it. Going back to what you were talking about in terms of transparency.
I mean, we've had U.S. citizens die in countries that I've never even heard of for conflicts that I've never even heard of.
So it's there's some part you need a lot more transparency in terms of definitions and all that stuff. I'm not a huge believer in saying we need to know where all of our special ops people are, and I think Rich would agree with me on that.
Yeah.
You certainly don't need to know where everyone is, and that's kind of where we are. I'm not sure. Administration, the State Department's made a valid case to get people like Sam Clement fired up and bowing up and prancing around to go fight and die in Eastern Europe.
And I don't have bone spurs, so I'm out of luck there.
Yes,
why are you even worried about it, Sam? It's not going to affect you.
And I know it hasn't made the case for me to say, John, go on and enlist and what have you. And I don't know what that pressure point is. I don't know what that pain point is, but it does kind of leave us in a sticky situation where we are the world's remaining superpower, but why were we supposed to go fight and die?
Yeah.
And so we don't have the process in place. And we don't have the definition of success in place. And at some point, we're going to have to come up with those.
I agree.
Courtney, what do you think about that?
I agree.
Really? You see, this is a point of trading perspectives that is really pretty awesome because Courtney really rarely agrees with us. I mean, what do you think about that, Courtney?
I think she agrees.
Killing me, Smalls.
All right. With that, we always love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, let us know. You can always drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com, where you can leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say, you can always send us an email at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com. Or I've already said that, haven't I? We've lost a member here. Or you can go to oakworth.com and take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of interesting information. With that, Sam, I'm going to give you last chance. I'm going to give you last chance here today.
I'm good on that.
I'm good today too. Y'all take care.